What's up, YouTube? Today I want to talk about the idea of idealism versus reality. And first, I want to look at idealism by definition. Idealism prioritizes ideas, values, and the mind as the fundamental aspects of reality, often envisioning what could be and striving for perfection. I think if you look at both political parties historically and even today, generally liberals want to push for idealism and the world the way that they think it should be versus conservatism, which mostly advocates for keeping things the way they are. If it's worked for as long as it has, then why change anything? And I think a conversation or a debate that is really emblematic of this difference is the debate with Destiny and Ben Shapiro. And regardless of what you might think of these two individuals, their debate that was hosted by Lex Friedman last year was a really good one. The first topic that they talked about was the topic of education.
Do you think there should be like some minimum threshold or minimum baseline of like, at the very least, every school should have a non-leaky gym, or every school should have, if children can't afford lunch or breakfast, like some sort of food provided, or every school should have these like baseline things?
So again, I'm going to quibble with the premise of the question because I think that when it comes to, for example, food insecurity, school food programs, again, you can always pour money into any program and at the margins create change. I mean, there's no doubt that pouring money onto anything will create change in a marginal way. The question is how large is the margin and how big is the movement? You're starting at a second order question, which is what if we ignore what I would think are the big primary questions of education, namely family structure, value of education at home, how much you have parents who are capable or willing to help with homework. What are the incentive structures we can set up for a society that actually facilitate that? How local communities take ownership of their schools is a big one, right? All of these issues we're ignoring in favor of, say, air conditioning or lunch programs. And so in a vacuum, if you say air conditioning and lunch programs, sounds great in a vacuum. In terms of prioritization of values and cost structure, are those the things that I think are going to move the needle in a major way in terms of public policy? I do not. And in fact, I think that many of them end up being disproportionate wastes of money. I mean, I've talked before pretty controversially about the fact that an enormous amount of school lunch programs are thrown out. Like an enormous amount of that food ends up in the garbage can. Is there a better way to do that? If there is a better way to do it, then I'm perfectly willing to hear about that better way to do it. But it seems to me that one of the big flaws in the way that many people of the left approach government is what if we hit every gnat with a hammer? And my question is, what if the gnat isn't even the problem? What if there is a much bigger substructure problem that needs to be solved in order to, if you're shifting deck chairs on the Titanic, sure, you can make the Titanic slightly more balanced because the deck chairs are slightly better oriented. But the real question is the water that's gaping into the Titanic.
But this was a good dichotomy of seeing the idealism versus the realism at work here in our political space. And to apply this to the topic of the video, which is immigration, the arguments of idealism that are applied to Democrats have been a losing strategy. You can cite the recent election as evidence of this, with the Biden administration pushing for more immigration to a scale of which we had never seen before. And to give a broader context, the climate of the United States, this was around the beginning of COVID, and I think this was a sign of how disconnected Democrats were, at least to the American public, as many people were going through extreme financial struggles because of COVID. They did not see how allowing immigration to the degree that it was allowed would make logical sense, as this would cause a financial strain on the current system. We did not have the available resources, which is a key component of this. And I think if you believe in like finite resources, which I mean, it's not really a belief, it's a reality of the world. It's like, sure, we're a first world country and we might arguably have the resources to support this, but when there is failing infrastructure and there is the amount of homeless that we've had, or even veterans that still need help, or even people that have mental health issues and we're not adequately able to take care of them, there's kind of a sense of, why are we doing this for them when we can't even take care of ourselves? And I think that's a very powerful motivator for, again, why this was a losing proposition for Democrats. It's like the dam was already breaking as far as we've reached our limit for what society can support economically and financially. And to have all these people come in and immigrate here would be a further strain on the system that was unnecessary. It would be an unnecessary L. As if you looked all around us at the time, many people were still either recovering from COVID economically, or they were probably in the worst financial situation that they had been in their lives. But another point with why this was a losing strategy is because if you look at modern Democrat politicians now and how they talk about immigration, there seems to be no nuance between what is an illegal immigrant and what is a immigrant going through the process in the correct way. And as someone who is a product of legal immigration, I was born here, but both of my parents legally emigrated here. I can tell you from personal experience, it's like it was very frustrating. As I mean, if you look at the landscape and political conversations around immigration now, this has done almost irreparable damage, because you have people advocating for even more limited or no immigration at all. And I think that's an unintentional consequence of not making a distinction between illegal and legal immigration. And that's the second point that I wanted to make as far as why this unchecked idealism is a losing strategy for the Democrats. I think the third reason why this was a bad strategy is because there wasn't really as much of a give and take with implementing these processes. I think if anything, a better way they could have done this in a way that would have de-escalated tensions is give like a financial incentive to, let's say, house an immigrant, or like a tax break. And I'm not saying that that's like the end all be all solution, but that's just, off the top of my head, it's like if you want to incentivize a behavior or incentivize people to be more accepting of something, then why not, give them the carrot and a stick? And again, this isn't like, I'm not trying to say that's the best solution, but in my opinion, that is a step above how it was implemented, where it just basically seemed like, oh, let's take all these people in and kind of figure it out later. And I think we saw the fallout of that problem. I mean, regardless of what you think of Trump, it seems like it was established fact that there were a lot of criminals that came over the border. And I'm not trying to say that every immigrant is a criminal, but my point with that is just saying that the process by which we verify safe people coming through was obviously not working as intended, and that leads to problems and a higher concentration of crime in these areas where these criminals were allowed to live, and that's another problem. I also think this was a losing strategy for Democrats because this tone deafness or insensitivity contributed to the narrative that, that the Democrats are the party of the elite now. Because if you look at people who were mainly affected by this, it was the middle/working class. I mean, people within a certain income level will be largely unaffected by these kinds of economic changes, as they have like a surplus of wealth and can kind of weather the storm. But I think if anything, this was just another thing to knock the middle class down a peg on top of COVID. But I hope I didn't give the impression that I'm trying to kind of turn people away from thinking idealistically. At the end of the day, this idealism versus realism push and pull that we've had has really helped us accomplish great things over the course of history. And without that, we would have never gotten to where we are now. I can understand the argument for wanting things to stay the same or wanting to progress things forward. And I think the way that we progress in the future is somewhere along the middle. I think we need both dichotomies in society, as the idealism helps us reach goals that we might have thought at one point to be impossible, but the realism perspective helps us create attainable steps to get to that goal. But if you disagreed or if you agreed with the video, please consider leaving a comment and liking and subscribing. I would really appreciate it. But other than that, let me know what you think. If you made it this far, please take care and have a great day. Thank you.